The world of Dead Cells is a treacherous place. Danger lurks around every corner, and death is always waiting for you. However, today we're going to see if our main protagonist, which is this random dead guy, can persevere and hunt down every boss on our checklist. The checklist includes all of these lovely individuals. Also, I know it's early on in the video, but this is your once per video reminder to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Also, I just wanted to mention the last video does look like it's about to hit 300 views, which is super awesome and makes me so happy. But that does mean that I'm going to start working on the next RimWorld video soon. It's probably going to take a while to record and especially edit, but just know that that is in progress. Anyways, back to the video. We're going to read the scroll and use it to surely increase our pure brutality, as you do. This also has the added benefit of making us not die in one hit to anything that touches us, which is always appreciated. Now, as you all know, I am a pro gamer, which is why I got the little reward here for beating the level flawlessly. I actually get that every time I play this game, and I've never been hit even, so take that as you will. Now, we're going to go ahead and skip this dialogue here because we don't care what this man has to say. All we need is this health flask. We're not asking, we're taking. Now, despite the game's greatest attempts to teach me how to dodge, I'm going to completely ignore all of that and just take these metal balls directly to the face. Please don't take that out of context. I will find your mother and tell her what your search history looks like. We're also just now making it to our first elite enemy, which, really isn't going to give us too much trouble. It's only the first area, but killing this guy does give us the Vine Rune, which will let us erupt these little vines straight out of the ground, and it makes a lot of the areas accessible now. Also, if it seems like I'm moving fast in this video, it's because I'm trying to. I recorded this all in a week, and I wanted the video to be around 10 minutes long, and it ended up being like 20 something, so I am trying to speed along here, but we're going to be coming up on the first boss pretty soon. Now, please excuse the absolutely terrible gameplay that you're about to witness. I believe that I did this fight somewhere around 4 in the morning while I was staying up all night trying to beat this game in a week. I actually beat the game in about 3 hours, but I decided to go through and do a bunch of side content too. Besides the point, I was pretty tired when I was doing this. I did it flawlessly later on, so not to worry. However, I did get this little moment here where I got to style on him a little bit, hit a mid-air parry, which was cool. But I'm really not proud of this, and every time I watch back, it makes me a little bit sadder. But with our first boss down, I'm going to go ahead and try to move on to the first DLC area, actually, which is the Fatal Falls. I actually think it's one of the easiest DLC areas, but when you first get here, it can be quite overwhelming. However, I always think it's fun just throwing enemies off the map and how much verticality there is here. And I don't think any of the enemies are too difficult by themselves. I just think the whole area is super easy to fall off of. I've definitely died quite a few times doing that. Now, not to spoil it, but here is where my run is going to end just about. I was getting pretty cocky at this point in the run for whatever reason, and I flew a little too close to the sun and ended up dying right here, but it's all good. Like I said, it really was my fault. I was getting a little too greedy trying to go for the legendary item there. This is the attempt where I ended up killing the first boss flawlessly, by the way. I just decided to add this in, one, so that I could get the cool outfit for the rest of the run, and also to prove that I'm not completely terrible at this game. So, to demonstrate that, I'm going to come in here and beat this guy's kneecaps in with this baseball bat that I found. Hopefully that convinces everybody here. Also, if you made it this far in the video and haven't liked yet, I'm going to find where you live and also beat your kneecaps in with the baseball bat, because what the hell, man. We're about 5 minutes into the video and you haven't liked yet. That's pretty egregious. So if you could do that, it would be greatly appreciated, and I think your knees would also appreciate it. And while I have a moment where there's not too much going on in the background, I wanted to go ahead and say that I did not kill every boss in the game in this run, and I didn't end up getting the true ending. And this video does end up getting like 20 likes though. I'll go ahead and suffer through getting to boss L5. I only got to like 2 in this run. But I'll go ahead and get boss L5 and kill the true final boss as well as the remaining 2 bosses for you guys. But with that, we're about to hit up on the second boss now. I honestly have never found the Timekeeper to be that difficult of a boss. I know I've heard of people struggling with him, and I did struggle a little bit when I first started the game, but I think if you go through a couple of rounds and defeat her a couple times, it's really not too rough of a fight. Kind of like I joked about, if you just parry enough, it's definitely super doable. In fact, this is usually one of my faster fights in the whole game. It's also one of those fights that I would eventually like to go through and try to flawless because I think it's super doable. But with that, second boss is down. Now though, we're coming up on the end of our first run, just kind of doing our rounds and making our way through the High Peak Castle level, which I always think is fun. The enemies here are diverse enough that it's not a super boring area, and it's always nice that you can get an extra scroll at the very end if you do all 3 areas. I did the little elite phase here. If you think I performed badly on this one, don't worry, because the second one was so much worse. It actually ruins my day. Every time I go back and watch myself do that fight, here it is. I wasted my extra life on this fight as well. I seriously have no idea what was going through my brain. I know how to do this fight. It's not difficult whatsoever, but hopefully it made your day a little better watching me struggle on that. Anyways, I did redeem myself just a little bit by making this last elite fight look pretty flawless. And with that, we have all 3 keys to the castle and we can go through. As you can see, I did barely survive this castle in this run. So I had never actually unlocked this door in my runs. I just always usually got 2 keys. So I was a little nervous going in this room. I really didn't want to die. But I do end up getting the extra scroll and recycling the 2 items in here for some extra gold. Alright, so I just wanted to warn you now, I'm not going to make any attempt to really make an excuse on how I performed in this fight. My Hand of the King has always been one of my worst fights, and I've done it quite a few times, and I still seem to struggle. I think it'd be super fun one day to sit down and really practice it, and probably end up trying to flawless it at some point. But pretty much every time I do this fight, if I win, it's just purely because I have a really good weapon, or really good build setup, and that's exactly what happened here. But Hand of the King is definitely one of those fights that I really need to work on because it looks rough every single time I do it. I will say though, the weapon that you unlock from beating Hand of the King, it's probably one of the more fun ones that I've used in the game. I don't think it's my favorite weapon. I think that probably goes to Lightning Bolt and the Great Sword, but I forget what it's called, but his weapon's always fun to use. It takes up most of the screen, and it's kind of hard to lose when you're using it, especially if you get really lucky and you get like a legendary one. It makes most of the game pretty easy. Also, just as I'm editing this, I was just thinking about it. Once again, if there's any games that you think would be cool to see on the channel, or you want to see me try to do something unique with, I usually try to implement something either more difficult or interesting with the games that I play. But if there's any games that you can think of that you would want to see me do that with, just leave that down in the comments. I'm down to play pretty much anything, so long as it's a well thought out game. But no, I think that'd be fun if you wanted to leave that down in the comments. Anyways, with us finally beating the quote-unquote final boss of the game, even though it's not the true final boss, I'm gonna now go through and grab my first boss cell, and then also I think I ended up killing Mamatic on boss cell 2, just because I usually find the fight to be an easier one. But the rest of this video is just gonna be me clearing out a lot of the DLC areas, and I think I'm pretty much done with the base game content. Also, I got the Panchaku weapon to do the Mamatic weapon with, and if you ever have paired that with the combo mutation, it's super fun. But with that little mini boss defeated, we're gonna go through, clear out the rest of this area, and then eventually make it to the nest area, which is where you fight the Mama Tick, obviously. Even though, like I said, I don't find Mama Tick to be an incredibly hard boss fight. Like I said, I did bump it up to boss L2 for this one just to make it a little bit more challenging, but I do think it's probably one of my more favorite fights throughout the entire game. I just think it's cool. It's one of my favorite backdrops too. I just think they did a really good job on it. I love the aesthetic of this fight, I guess. But it just kind of shows that a fight doesn't need to be super difficult for me to necessarily enjoy it or think that it's well put together. Also, to kind of showcase what I was talking about earlier, the combo mutation when in combination with the Panchaku weapon goes pretty crazy here. The little spin move that you do, all the little counts, or all the little hits that it does count towards your combo multiplier. So if you're just kind of wailing on a big enemy like this over a decent amount of time, it'll eventually build up quite a bit of damage. So for the next fight that I'm going to be doing, which is Conjunctivitis, or however exactly you pronounce that, you gotta go through the Ancient Sewers, which I've heard some negative things about the Ancient Sewers. I've heard that people find it quite annoying to go through. Personally, I really don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that much worse than the normal sewers. In fact, I think it's kind of an enjoyable route to take, but I guess to each their own. But if I am doing like a higher boss soul route, I usually like to go through Ancient Sewers. I think it's nice. But with that, we're going to be coming up on Conjunctivitis pretty soon here. In my opinion, Conjunctivitis is one of the cooler looking boss fights. Like, the first time I saw it, I was pretty, not blown away, but I just thought it was a really cool looking boss fight. Personally, as I've expressed, I think this boss has way too much health, and I always feel like the fight just goes on for a little bit too long. I don't find it difficult, really. I think it's just kind of a bullet sponge for no reason. I've never actually died to Conjunctivitis, no matter what boss I've been playing on. Maybe that'll change when I start playing on some of the higher ones, but it's just one of those fights that I don't necessarily dislike, but every time I get to it, it's a little tedious getting through the whole fight, just because, as I've said, I feel like it goes on for a bit too long at times. With that being said, it is probably one of the safer bosses, so if I am going for a higher boss cell count, or run like that, I do usually like to, like I said, go through Ancient Sewers, and usually end up fighting Conjunctivitis. But after Conjunctivitis, there's no new bosses in those runs, so that's going to be the end of this one, and I'm going to be moving on to the next run where I go to kill the giant. So in order to actually get to the giant boss fight, you've got to go through the caverns area, which requires grabbing its own key at the very beginning of the game. It's kind of a process, to be honest with you, but I think it's worth it. I think the cavern area is super unique, and also I think personally it's one of the areas that I struggle with the most. I always usually end up either dying or taking quite a bit of damage whenever I'm in the caverns, so not looking forward to doing that on some of the higher boss level runs, but I think it'll be interesting. It'll probably force me to learn the area a little bit better, but all in all I think it's cool. It's got some pretty varied enemies. So I may have already made it obvious, but I think personally the giant is one of my favorite fights in the whole game that I've done so far. Like I said, there's still 3 that I haven't completed yet, so that's due to change, but as of right now, the giant is probably one of my favorite boss fights. If not, it might actually be my favorite boss fight. I did struggle here for a little bit, more than a little bit. It was like half the fight. I didn't realize that you could hop up onto his hand to hit his eyeball, so I kept just trying to hit it like you're seeing by jumping in the air, which is not a very great strategy, but I think once you figure out how the fight actually works, it's really not that difficult. I've heard quite a bit of differing opinions online. Some people say that this fight is super hard. The game itself says that this boss fight and generally this expansion is one of the more difficult ones, but personally I find the actual route to get to the giant more difficult than the fight itself. But I do think the fight is super cinematic, and it's, like I said, my favorite fight so far. And of course, the way that the fight ends is always funny. It really threw me off the first time, but I think it's a fun little end to a relatively... I don't know. I really don't think it's that hard, but if you do find it hard, I guess the ending is even funnier. Hey, so real quick, I did want to give a bit of an epilepsy warning or like a photosensitivity warning. This next clip is sped up 10,000 times because I thought it would be funny, but reviewing it in post-editing, it's quite rough and a little bit jarring to look at. The Undying Shores area is always a little interesting to me. I personally find it a little bit annoying, but I think that's partially because I'm not that good at it. It's one of those areas that I never really look forward to going to, but once I'm here, it's sort of fun, so like I said, I really think it's just something I need to learn more, but with that, here's the next boss fight. The Scarecrow is always one of those fights in Deadcells that I have a little bit more fun with. I still don't think it's incredibly difficult, even if it's your first time fighting it. I think the moveset is pretty obvious, like there's nothing too tricky in there. But I know I said the Conjunctivitis boss fight is too long. I actually feel the opposite way about the Scarecrow. I always feel like it doesn't quite go on for long enough. You can kind of see me struggling here just to heal, because the Scarecrow is pretty aggressive. Always like right on top of you and doesn't give you too many opportunities to heal, but so long as you know like the parry timings and the dodge timings, it's not too bad and doesn't do too much damage. But I always enjoy the Scarecrow fight, and I think it's a pretty cool area that you fight him into. It's also worth mentioning that I'm using the giant killer sword for this fight, which always inflicts a critical hit if you're fighting elite or boss enemies, which I just thought was fitting, but it's a fun sword. I think it's worth killing the giant for. So from here on out in the video, everything that you see past this point is going to be the Castlevania DLC. It's just the death fight and, of course, Dracula. But I actually think the Castlevania DLC might be the most fun one. It's super unique. I love the art style, and obviously, I've never actually played Castlevania, but just playing through this DLC kind of makes me want to. But like I said, I think all the enemies are well designed, and I think the way that you actually get to the Dracula fight is pretty cool. Right when you're about to fight Dracula, you get grabbed up by death, and you, surprise, do that boss fight instead. Now I know that I was just glazing the Castlevania DLC quite a bit. I think the Bible weapon that I'm using here is pretty cool, especially if you've played other games like I played Vampire Survivors, and as soon as I saw this, it made me smile quite a bit. I think it's cool. Obviously it's from Castlevania, not Vampire Survivors, but that's what I recognized it from. Anyways, I know I just got done glazing the Castlevania DLC quite a bit, but I actually think the death fight was relatively underwhelming. I'm not sure if that's because I was using the Bible to beat death to death, but I just didn't feel like it lasted very long, and I also didn't think it was very difficult. But I do think that the weapon that he drops is really cool, and I want to do a full run with it. So in order to fight Dracula, after you kill death, you actually have to do the Timekeeper fight again in a separate run. This is actually one of my first attempts trying to use like a more ranged build in Dead Cells, and I thought it was pretty fun. I did it because I heard that range was pretty good for Dracula, which I actually disagree with. I think it's okay for the first phase, but second phase I definitely wish that I had a melee weapon, not a bow, simply because I ran out of ammo a lot, but probably the easiest Timekeeper fight I've had in a minute, so it was fun for that. Alright guys, I'm gonna be honest with you. I know that I've kind of been sitting up on my high throne saying that most of the fights in Dead Cells really aren't that hard unless you're playing on a super high dead or boss cell run. Dracula is probably... I know I haven't fought all the bosses yet. I think Dracula is hands down the hardest boss fight in the game that I've personally done. That may change when I get the true ending to Dead Cells, which... speaking of which, if this video hits, let's say 20 likes, or 300 views, whichever one happens first, I will end up doing that. Probably gonna hate myself for saying that just now, but I think it's worth it. But no, Dracula first phase isn't anything crazy. I think, like I said earlier, the bow advice is actually pretty good for this. However, I still wish that I had brought a melee weapon because I don't think the bow does great at all in Dracula's final form. I think it's actually a terrible choice, and like I said, I wish I had something like the Great Sword, or maybe even Lightning Bolt, but that could just be because I have a personal bias towards Lightning Bolt because I think it's the most fun weapon in the game. However, regardless of all that, Dracula's final form is actually the only boss that I died to in the entire run, other than I think I died to like Hand of the King 1 or 2 times, but all the other ones I actually did beat on my first try. Dracula, I tried a couple times and I just couldn't get it. This fight is ridiculously hard. But in my next video, if I do make another Dead Cells video, I'll be killing Dracula's final form, I'll be being the final boss, and then I'll also be trying to beat all the bosses on Boss Cell 5. So, like I said, if that's something that you're interested in, then go ahead and like and maybe even subscribe. It really would make my day. Especially since you finally got to see me actually fail a boss fight for once in this game. Now, with all that being said, even though I did die to it and I'm a little salty that I lost, I actually think Dracula's final form is really cool. I'm super glad that it ended like this and not his first phase, because as soon as I beat the first phase, my first thought was that it was super underwhelming because I was expecting a really hard fight. To be honest, the final form is harder than I was expecting it to be. I was not really expecting to fail it, but I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's good that it's a little bit more challenging than I thought it would be. And I am looking forward to re-attempting it, but yeah, I did die tragically here trying to beat Dracula's final form. But with that being said, that's going to be at the end of this video. I hope that you all are having a great day, and if you're not, maybe this video made it even just a little bit better. I appreciate all the support on my recent videos. It's kind of nice, especially sitting at work, just kind of watching my views go up, and I smile every time that I get a comment. But with all that, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.